Hello everyone, my name's Pete and I'm on a journey through MMOs. In the past, if anyone were to ask me about them, I would answer as a reflex that MMOs are bad and not worth my time. This was all based on zero experience, and so here, I'm actually doing some learning to see what I really think. If this sort of thing interests you at all, then consider pressing subscribe and you can join me for the ride. The Elder Scrolls Online is popular, sure, probably something to do with its hugely successful series of single player games over the years. I, like many others, have spent vast amounts of time in Tamriel, defeating Daedric princes, hunting dragons, and getting lost in the ruins of extinct civilizations. This means that, unfortunately, ESO carries a boatload of expectations when it comes to my playing experience. Now, each of the Elder Scrolls games I've played has been excellent and all for different reasons, and I'm hoping that here they find a way to keep hold of that feeling of wanting to explore whilst maintaining the game design that kinda has to feature to make a shared world work. So enough about what I expect, because I'm going to ruin everything that way. I launched the game into a cutscene that seems to be entirely about showing off the iconic scenery from the Elder Scrolls franchise. It's also showing off some fight scenes that I know it won't be able to match up on in gameplay, but it's a nice little setup for the chaotic world filled with monsters and trouble that I'm sure to be plonked into. As soon as the scene ends, I'm hit with a screen trying to sell me an upgrade. Why don't you let me at least make a character first, please, game? This, by the way, is the first game in this series that I've actually paid money for, so they've already been in my wallet. And now character creation, and it's fairly standard Elder Scrolls. And since I'm expecting to play in first person, because that's how I normally play Elder Scrolls, I'm not going to be overly concerned with how my character looks. I'm also expecting stupid amounts of cosmetics to override the look entirely before long anyway. The races are locked to alliances. I'm not certain what this means, but it feels a little bit restrictive. What if I wanted to be a Khajiit that's not part of the Almeri Dominion? Well, I guess I'm out of luck, aren't I? I had my heart set on being a cat, so I'll just have to trust this decision won't lock me into anything further down the line story-wise. There's also an option here to see your character in their underwear, so I now know that this sort of thing isn't restricted to Final Fantasy XIV, but it's still very weird to me. So I hit the randomize button a few times and it spits out this scarred cat with an eye patch, and you know what? I like it. I've chose Warden as a class, but someone told me I'm never stuck to class gear in this, so I'm not too worried about what that choice might mean. And then it's time to pick a name, and for lore reasons, Pete smells if you have nose. A short while later and I'm given control, and I find myself in a prison cell being stared at. How original. The elf standing outside tells me that I teleported in along with a Daedra, and that we need to do something about the golems that have suddenly reanimated in the grounds around after my teleportation here. This lady's voice is so familiar to me. If someone could just tell me why, I'd appreciate it. I get to grips with the controls and the UI. The UI elements feel very Skyrim. I can see why they went with this choice given the success of Skyrim, but they had a chance to make something a bit unique here, and I think they took the easy route. A refreshing UI helps me lift some of the repetitive burnout that you get from long-term stints of playing Elder Scrolls games. And here, if I've come from Skyrim to ESO, I'm gonna feel the same. Then I get to choose my weapon from the various ones laid out on the tables, and this is nice because it instantly confirms the fact that I can choose and use whatever I like and not be restricted, just like the mainline games. I opt for a pair of daggers because this will offer me a playstyle that I'm not really familiar with, and I'd like some variety in my life. And I didn't want to be another stealth archer. I'm also really bad at stealth unless it's from a distance, so this should actually be a bit interesting for me. The combat tutorial is acceptable, but it does highlight some of the jank early on. I'm personally okay with adjusting to a bit of jank, but I can totally see why some people might be instantly put off by this. There's an attempt to make it feel like Skyrim's combat, but it doesn't feel quite as impactful. On the other hand, it's much nicer than the combat in Final Fantasy XIV or World of Warcraft so far. This is a lot more involving and reactive. I open a few menus and I almost vomit from sensory overload when the amount of information assaults my brain, so I close it and hope for a step-by-step tutorial, or else I'll have to sit down with a notepad for an 8-hour learning session. It's taken about 6 minutes from hitting record to finding myself walking around this room looking through urns for random items. Not one of them is useful as far as I know, but this is a promising sign that the game will correctly emulate that familiar Elder Scrolls feel. A little further in, and an unaware enemy presents me with an opportunity, which I will not pass up. It turns out you don't get instant kill animations. Either that or I'm not strong enough to instant kill this yet. Either way, I was a little bit disappointed, but I understand that the shared world stuff will offer limitations in that area. Moving along a walkway, I get kind of intimidated by a massive stomping gargoyle off to one side. Hopefully it can't get me because I firmly believe that I would be eaten immediately. I also find some armor racks lining the hallways, and this is a nice way to offer me a choice of different armors. We step outside and I'm greeted to the all too familiar sight of the White Gold Tower. I'm in Cyrodiil, and this makes my heart soar. Oblivion is far and away my favourite Elder Scrolls game, and despite its drawbacks, Cyrodiil is where my Tamrielic heart will forever remain. So, to celebrate, I pulled the wings off a butterfly. The combat out here is feeling much better. Now that I'm not locked to repeating actions to satisfy the tutorial parameters, I feel much more confident about it going forward. Killing stuff needs to be fun in a game like this, as it's probably a good 60-70% of what I'll be doing. So I'm running around killing these golems, and I run into another player who is apparently feeling the same way as I am, and they look like they're having a blast. Whoever you are, I want everyone to be as happy as you are killing these golems. There's some exposition from the lady who freed me, and the top and bottom of it is that we need something from somewhere else, so let's go and find it. The thing we need just so happens to be guarded by a big stompy gargoyle. So I kill it, and then I proceed to absorb the soul of a nearby stone. And boy oh boy are they riding those familiar Skyrim mechanics for all they're worth. What I absorbed was a sky shard. The NPC delivers the expected message of "that was just a myth," and I carry on feeling numb about being the chosen one. Maybe I play too many games. I take the soul of the stone back to the soulless stone, and I give the stone the power to be useful to the plot. And then it's time to go and face the Daedra that's causing the problems here. I asked the lady for advice on killing it, and she basically just tells me to make sure it's dead. So I sigh and I head through the door. The thing in the room is sufficiently creepy looking, but unfortunately I spend the entire fight just staring at its midsection and flailing my daggers about. I'm required to vacate the area occasionally to avoid an attack as indicated by the red markers on the ground, but ultimately this showdown is a bit naff. But that's okay, because the overall feeling of the game is comfortable, so I'm not put off. Up next I find myself in a magical portal room, and this looks like a nice little design for choosing the story that you want to follow. I'm not sure how all of this interacts and if I can do them all with the same character, but this is a much better idea than just shoving me into a bit of the world without any reason. Here I can make my own reason for going somewhere. The chain doors that I can't access I assume are the paid expansions, which is fine, and in a nice touch, standing near the portals plays some familiar music. I get completely drawn in by the Morrowind score, and then I get excited to visit Seyda-Neen, so that's where my story will begin. The storyline I'll be starting is called The Divine Conundrum, and that sounds stupid and I love it. A loading screen later and I receive one of the biggest nostalgic stomach punches I've ever had, when I find myself facing the door to the Seyda-Neen Census and Excise office. I hear the wail of a silt strider and I just pause for a moment taking in what I'm seeing. I don't think any amount of mod in Morrowind would top this moment for me, and admittedly, I haven't played that much Morrowind. My first time was in 2018. Starting players in this spot is a wonderful touch, and I think it hit me exactly as they intended it to. I head into the census office and I'm greeted by Cindelia Sergala. Clearly this is a job that stays in the family, and the nostalgia trip continues. I speak to him and get some nice lines about birth signs and people trying to change them, and I now realise there's a chance of consistently good voice acting here, and this is pretty good. There's no limeware platter to steal, so I settle for reading a few notes left around, and then I head along the path I would have taken playing Morrowind. In the place where I'd find Fargoth's ring, there's another one of those sky shards which I absorb for whatever reason, and then I head out to start exploring Seyda-Neen. And it's so familiar and nice. I just wander for a while taking in the familiar sights, and then I notice that silt strider looks like it's gold plated, and that's really weird. Okay, it's time to accept a quest, and I speak to the person with the icon over the head because I'm a good boy, and after a little bit of dialogue, Azura possesses someone to confirm that I am indeed the chosen one. Well, here we go again. Time to save the universe, but this time just like everyone else. I remain impressed by the quality of the voice acting, but the bar has been significantly lowered by what I heard in Final Fantasy XIV. The quest takes me into the Andrano Ancestral Tomb. This is one of the first places you'll stumble across playing Morrowind, and so the attempts at pulling those nostalgia strings remain glaringly obvious, but not unwelcome. I get to do some fighting and looting, and it's pretty fun. I have noticed, however, that the numbers are so high for everything. My health, mana and stamina are all sitting around 20,000, and the damage and armor rating for all this garbage equipment I'm using is displaying numbers in the thousands. I'm not entirely sure what's going on here, but it seems more inflated than it perhaps needs to be, but maybe I'll understand later. Part of this quest was for me to ask some questions to a spirit while a priest maintains a connection with them. I was given a parchment with the questions written on it, and I took the time to read them ahead of time, but then I discovered that you can't get them wrong as it's a one-track conversation. So I was over-prepared for this task. I think my mind sank into a Morrowind quest mindset, and not the modern restricted choices kind of game that Elder Scrolls has become these days. When this is done, I'm told by the priest that he'd love to introduce me to Vivek. Really? This early? I help with a tiny task and you're going to make me important? This kind of storytelling is wearing thin on me as I get older. I'm not going to be convinced by a story that just makes a helpful stranger become stupidly important to everybody in power. That's not how things work, and it spoils the pacing. I want to earn my reputation and the trust of others, not just be shoved along to get to the meat of the plot. Tell me a story before the story if you have to. So now I'm supposed to head to Vivek City, but I kinda just want to explore instead. This game's feeling very fast paced, there's players darting around, the quests are being a bit pushy. This will eventually feel stressful instead of a nicely paced story. So my plan is to call the bluff of the urgency and take my time. This might be a very inefficient way to play, but I really don't care. I'll have my story told the way I want. Like my battle with this Cliff Strider, which is a variation of the Cliff Racer, which tells me that things could have been a lot worse in Morrowind if we were hounded by these every 20 seconds as well. I open the level up screen and my character gives himself a round of applause, and this makes my eyes roll so hard that I almost tear a retina. What is this even for? Anyway, I spend a bit more time here exploring the skill screen and I find a weapon skill for daggers to unlock, and so I take that. The abilities all look varied and interesting enough, so there's a plus for the future of me playing. I decide to stop by Aurel's trade house, which is actually called Finden's Goods, and that's because Aurel isn't alive yet, which I forgot and it confused me. I also find this floating tree stump, which must take a few hundred years to slide off the tree and end up in the water where it's more familiar. I don't really understand what's going on here. This stump is not attached to anything, and this is a place where details are going to really matter to your players, so get it fixed, Bethesda. I take a side quest to investigate some happenings at the lighthouse, and suddenly the urgency just melts away and I start feeling comfortable exploring again. My summary so far is that this game feels like an Elder Scrolls game on speed. All the pieces that you'd expect to hear. There are nice bits of lore scattered around, well-voiced NPCs, freedom to steal and use any weapons and armor, but it's all happening at what feels like breakneck speed. It also has a more shallow feel to it, but it's my assumption that certain things need to be condensed and managed a bit more closely for an MMO. I have zero technical knowledge here, so I'm just talking out of ignorance. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. I have to walk to the top of the lighthouse to speak to the guard, and when I'm up there I notice that I can see Red Mountain on one side, Vivek City in the distance in the other direction, and my sense of adventure is 100% kindled. I am ready to explore, but I'll go at my own speed, and I will not let this game rush me along like it's trying to. I'm going to be wandering around the swamps of Seydanine for several hours before moving on, so I'll come back to you with more thoughts as I play. If you want more first impressions from me, then you're welcome to hit subscribe, and if you want to talk games with me, then there's a Discord link in the description. But for now, wealth beyond measure, Outlanders. And I'll see you in the next one.